Today, March 8th, is International Women's Day, a day dedicated to celebrating the cultural, social and political achievements of women, and a day to reflect on the issues that they still face globally. But when did International Women's Day start? Who started it? And did it help destroy a centuries-old Russian monarchy? Well, let's find out. To unravel the true history of Women's Day, we need to go back over 100 years. The first hints of it appear around 1900. The German Social Democratic Party were holding conferences to discuss women's issues, such as the fact that they weren't allowed to vote. By 1907, the International Conference of Socialist Women had gathered in Stuttgart, Germany. This was led by Clara Zetkin, a German Marxist from that German Social Democratic Party. One of her primary goals was to get women into the workforce so that they could take part in workers' rights organisations, so that they would have the means to improve their own conditions. At this conference, they demanded
the right to universal female suffrage without qualifications of property, tax, education, or any other kind of barrier which may hinder members of the working class from availing themselves of their political rights.
Across the ocean in the US, the Socialist Party and the Women's National Committee had declared the first Women's Day. Marching through the streets of New York, they protested for better working conditions and better pay. This all took place on the 28th of February 1909. The whole March 8th date hadn't been set yet. Following this, a second International Conference of Working Women came together in 1910. There, in Copenhagen, over 100 delegates from across the world came together. Clara Zetkin pushed the idea of International Women's Day, a day every year and in every country where women could organise and press for equal rights. After a unanimous vote, International Women's Day was born. These women at the conference were pushing some other revolutionary ideas. They demanded an 8-hour working day. They proposed that pregnant women stop working 8 weeks prior to giving birth, and that women would be paid a motherhood insurance of 8 weeks if the child lived, and all working women would enjoy these benefits, including agricultural labourers, home workers and maids. These policies will be paid for out of a special maternity fund out of tax revenues. These policies were supposed to not only help mothers and keep them safe, but also to pay women for their essential non-paid work that kept society functioning, while also allowing them to remain in the paid workforce. These policies heavily influenced the ideas of maternity and paternity leave that are now common in nearly all developed countries today. From its very start, International Women's Day was a day for working women, and its goal was to address their issues. Following on from this, International Women's Day celebrations sprang up across Europe. The first European celebration of International Women's Day happened in Vienna on March 8, 1911. Women marched around the famous Ringstrasse, carrying banners including red flags commemorating the martyrs of the Paris Commune and demanding the equal right to vote. If you don't know what the Paris Commune is, then go check out Step Back History's video on the subject. Link is in the description. Millions of flyers soon carpeted Germany, crying out,
Comrades, working women and girls, March 19 is your day. It is your right. Behind your demand stands social democracy, organized labor. The socialist women of all countries are in solidarity with you. March 19 should be your day of glory.
More than 1 million women took to the streets of Germany, crying out for equality. The fervour continued into 1912 with the Lawrence textile strike in the US, better known as the Bread and Roses strike. Bread and Roses was a slogan coined by Rose Schneiderman, a Polish-born American socialist and feminist. During her speech, she said,
"The worker must have bread, but she must have roses too."
In other words, workers need more than just wages to survive, the bread. They also need dignity and decent working standards. Roses. More and more demonstrations took place as Women's Day continued to be celebrated. But then the world decided to have a war, a First World War. And across Europe, political demonstrations such as Women's Day were cracked down on to keep the peace on the home front. To oppose this war, Clara Zetkin organised the third and final Socialist Women's Conference in April 1915. It drew delegates from across the globe, including people such as Nadezhda Krupskaya and her husband, some chap called Vladimir Lenin. They stated that the war only benefited the rich and the arms manufacturers, and stole away the sons and husbands of mothers. The war went on despite all the efforts of these women, but the idea of Women's Day also went on. The most dramatic celebration of International Women's Day was in 1917 in Russia, led by the feminist Alexandra Kollontai. She is also a recipient of the Order of the Aztec Eagle Award, which is completely unrelated, but also completely badass. Women's Day had already caused quite a ruckus in Russia. Russian women had observed the first International Women's Day in 1913. The following year, all the organisers of International Women's Day in Russia ended up in handcuffs, which kind of dampened the celebrations. But the war had changed things quite quickly. By 1917, the amount of women working in factories had skyrocketed as men marched off to war. The women replacing them were paid half as much. On top of this, these women found themselves mostly working in the textile and chemical industries, ones with long hours and horrific conditions. Things came to a boiling point on International Women's Day in 1917, as women took to the streets to protest their mistreatment. Storming the streets of Petrograd on February 23rd or March 8th on our calendar, women striked against war, starvation, and the Tsar. In their thousands they marched through the streets, calling out to factory workers, men and women alike, to join them. 2 days later, nearly every industry in Petrograd had ground to a halt. The protests weren't just made up of workers anymore. Students, teachers, and those across the economic spectrum joined in. Tsar Nicholas ordered the military to shoot if they deemed it necessary. Soldiers and police smashed into the demonstrators, but to no avail. They couldn't be stopped. The women had managed to convince whole regiments to switch sides and join them. As Leon Trotsky tells us about the women, they go up to the cordons more boldly than the men, taking hold of the rifles, beseech, almost command, put down your bayonets, join us. Russia's February Revolution had begun. Trotsky wrote, the 23rd of February was International Women's Day, and meetings and actions were foreseen. But we did not imagine that this Women's Day would inaugurate the revolution. 7 days after International Women's Day, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated, ending 304 years of Romanov rule over Russia. The provisional government became one of the first governments of a major power to grant women the right to vote. In 1921, Clara Zetkin and the Second International Conference of Communist Women in Moscow decided that March 8th would now be the official date. Lenin, along with Zetkin, made International Women's Day a communist holiday in 1922, and communists in China started celebrating that year as well. Now, these things were all eventually destroyed by Stalin. In 1936, he reversed most liberal policies and banned abortion. Women's right to vote would become useless afterward. But the idea still remained. That revolutionary spirit that caused them to be won in the first place couldn't be done away with. With its connections to communism and Russia, Women's Day fell out of favour in the West, especially as women gained the right to vote and people considered women's fights for rights to be over.
Against the communist attempts at world enslavement.
The US, gripped with panic and fear at the very thought of communism's existence, disavowed the day entirely. After 1922, information on it becomes quite scarce. Sometime during the 1940s, it seems to have switched from Women's Day to Women's Day. And so this day, one that had inspired working women of the 20th century, one that had been the rallying cry for rights and the fuel for a revolution, was hidden away behind an iron curtain. International Women's Day remained a major holiday only celebrated in socialist countries up until the 1970s. But as flower power took hold in the late 60s, feminists brought the celebration back and gave it a new meaning in the West as the women's movement grew. Most of the international community did not formally observe the date until 1975. The UN celebrated International Women's Year that year, with Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman in space, acting as a Soviet representative. Since that year, the UN officially celebrated International Women's Day on March 8th. International Women's Day is now an official holiday in many countries, On this day, feminist demonstrations are held across the globe. Because even though those early, revolutionary women of the 20th century achieved an enormous deal for women's rights, the sad fact is that, globally, women still earn less than their male counterparts. They are still less represented in business and politics, and they suffer greater risks of violence and carry the burdens of family care nearly single-handedly. But every year brings more progress. From Kabul to Kentucky, every International Women's Day celebrates a new year with more powerful women as this revolutionary day continues to inspire women just like it did over a century ago. I hope you enjoyed this video. You can leave a comment if you did, or if you have any questions regarding the video. All the sources used are in the description down below. You can also support the channel through Patreon or follow me on Facebook, Twitter or Reddit. All the links are in the description and it would be very much appreciated. Don't forget you can subscribe and hit the notification bell on your way out, and thank you so much for watching.